Brian, good afternoon. How are you today?
I am good. Thanks for having me.
So I just took a look at your work history and stuff, and by my count, you spent like a total of 16 years at West Point. Is that right? Between your school and all your teaching, and then you're there for the last like 9 years, it seems, of your career.
I did my 4 years as a cadet. I did 2 years on the faculty, so it's six, one other year, seven, and then my last 7 years in the Army were 14 years. So yeah, 14 to 34 we're at West Point. Well, 14 to I guess of 38 we're at West Point.
Did you grow up in that area?
No, I grew up in Philly. Really didn't become interested in the academy until I don't know. I guess I was in high school, Army Navy game. This looks pretty cool, that kind of thing.
So your dad wasn't in the military or army or anything.
He was. I mean, he was in during the Vietnam time, but I was just a kid. I really have no memory of that.
We were actually at West Point at the same time because I'm a year behind you. I graduated Coast Guard Academy in 1990, and so I spent my first semester, my junior year, as exchange cadet at West Point. And so that would have been in '89, so we would have been there at the same time. I thought West Point was an amazing school, especially compared to the Coast Guard Academy. The big hall where you all eat, your meals, and all
Yeah.
the statues around. And I got to tell you, Brian, academics there were so much easier than the Coast Guard Academy.
Well, I didn't think so. And maybe that's because I had a tendency to underachieve, at least initially, my first 2 years.
I took a look at your kind of fake bachelor's degree in leadership studies. I said Brian must have been a dummy, and he must have tried engineering or something, and then had to default to leadership studies. Is that what happened there?
It's 100%, man. I thought it'd be cool to be an aerospace engineer, so I signed up for that. Literally, I did.
What killed you, Calc 2 or something like that, or
Well, no,
DiffyQ?
I mean, it was just like I went to my first aero class my sophomore year, and I was like, "Holy shit, I'm way over my head here. What am I doing?" And then I didn't even major in anything. I was a leadership field of study. That's what I became. So you still had to take all the engineering courses and all that kind of stuff, but my focus was very much on leadership and group dynamics and all that behavioral science kind of stuff. So yeah, that's exactly what happened though.
I'm not too. I guess I'm not too proud. My major was called government. It was political science, and we only had 6 degrees. That was one of the things I was so impressed at the West Point. Like, Jesus, you could have took you could have majored in like Chinese poetry if you wanted. There were so many majors. I was like, what? And and then PE instructors were total dicks. Those PE
Yeah.
instructor guys. I had one of the guys come by the room and we do push-ups together. He challenged me to do that, and then and all the guys are scared of the PE majors. And none of my two roommates, one guy, he was a white guy, and his dad was a West Point guy, and he was not straight and narrow, but he definitely knew his way around. And that on the military side, it was more military in the Coast Guard Academy. I think I remember that my roommates yelling at me because I like had my jacket on the back of my chair, and if someone came by,
Yeah.
he wanted to menace. And then my other roommate was this black guy. Gosh, I wish I could remember his name, but this guy was a player. He had these most beautiful. I got to tell you right now, some of the most beautiful women I ever saw in my life were going to school at West Point. I know they're all like sisters to you, but to me, they were amazing. And he would have the most beautiful black girls come by his room because they were always, talking and stuff. Oh, and I would just be like, and he used to watch me and just laugh at me because I had no game at all. Yeah, but he was a really funny guy. And they had to, I don't know if you still had the rule because you were dean of the students there, right?
Yeah, I guess that would be the equivalent when I went back. Yeah, I was the dean of students. That would be the equivalent.
Because neither of my roommates had spent an all nighter because they had to lights out at midnight. I'm like, you guys never been up all night studying before?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I guess it's interesting, right? Having been a cadet and then going back to what was called the brigade tactical officer, and I wasn't all that great of a cadet. I mean, I underachieved my first 2 years, to be quite honest with you, academically, militarily. I mean, physically, I was in a good spot, but I felt like the rules were a suggestion rather than something to be followed, which explains why I spent some time on the area.
So you did some demerit circles in the thing.
I did. I did. I
How
walked
many how many hours did you put in?
72,
Yeah.
which I'm proud of because it could have been a lot more. It should have been a lot more, but I finally got my head out of my ass going into my junior year. You know, that's the time when you make the commitment like, hey, you're either all in or you're leaving. You know, something went off and you know, that's the rest is history, I guess.
Well, I remember coming away from that experience and getting back to Coast Guard Academy and just realizing how stupid the academics were difficult at the Coast Guard Academy. We lost so many good dudes to, second year or second semester of chemistry and second semester of physics. I think my class had a 40% attrition rate. It was just amazing. What a waste of resources. And I was like, I mean, I got my best GPA ever at West Point. I mean, I was had to study my ass off at the Coast Guard Academy. The other thing that was so interesting to me was at Coast Guard Academy, the evenings we had a study uniform, and the women had to keep their hair up. And if I remember at West Point at that time, the freshmen had to wear a study uniform, but sophomores up, they got to wear civilian clothes and put their hair down. And I think, and the women did. And I think just that reason right there, I saw it. The women were treated at West Point much better than they were at the Coast Guard
Mm-hmm.
Academy. I think just men saw these women looking like women, and they kind of, most of them naturally treated them better. It was really an interesting experience for me, for sure.
Well, I mean, you know, I obviously saw my experience through my own eyes as a cadet, but I always felt like the playing field was absolutely level. And you know, you mentioned earlier sisters, right? You know, we didn't scramble, you know, company wise. We stayed together. We showed up on our day, July 1st, 1985, and we all graduated. Well, those that stayed graduated in May of '89, and those are brothers and sisters to this day because of the shared experience. And I think there was something to be said for staying in the same company. Where nowadays, well, I can't speak to nowadays like today, but they have scrambled, moved cadets to other companies for a lot of different reasons. But I think that's one of the biggest takeaways for me. I don't remember a damn thing, you know, from math or my moment in aerospace engineering, but I remember the relationships and the shared hardship that really shaped me, I think, in a lot of ways for the rest of my career.
Did you enjoy teaching?
I did. I did. I enjoyed, I didn't enjoy the grading. I don't think anybody does that, but I did enjoy the time with cadets, to be honest with you.
Why did you go to the University of Maryland? You got your master's and PhD there. Did you choose there? Do you have family there, or do they have a program you're interested in, or did you fall into it? Is your wife from there or something?
No, it's because I'm a good soldier and I was told to apply to Maryland.
Oh, really?
It's a true story, man. So I was in Hawaii. I was in my second company command, and I had a packet to go to Ranger Regiment, which was kind of the thing to do as a young rifle company commander, late '90s or mid '90s, I guess. And my boss's boss were all regiment guys. But I also applied to West Point, and initially I applied to West Point without telling them because
When we
it
say
just
applied to West Point, applied to be a teacher.
to
Got
be a
it.
teacher, right? Yeah,
Right.
and part of the reason there's a lot of reasons I applied there. One is I kind of wanted to go back. They asked me to come back. I knew from a family perspective it'd be good to go, but I didn't really tell my boss. I didn't tell my boss initially just because there was and I think to a degree that perception exists even today is that, you know, it's not the hard assignment, right? It's not like regiment or, you know, another operational assignment. Anyway, I mean, just to get back to the point, so I applied to West Point. I'm in Hawaii at the time. I get a phone call at like 6 in the morning on a Friday, and that was a day off for us. My phone rings, and my first thought is, okay, I got a soldier that's in jail. Something just happened, you know, that kind of thing. And it was West Point actually. And I pick up the phone, and the officer on the other end said, you know, hey, remember this is like 1996, so there's no caller ID or any of that shit. And he's like, "Hey, I'm looking for Brian Reed." I said, "This is him, sir." He goes, "Did I wake you up?" I said, "Yes, sir. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. I know it's Friday, but it's a Donza for us." He goes, "Oh, I'm sorry." You know, and I'm thinking, dude, you should have like done the math. You know, I'm in Hawaii anyway. He's like, "Hey, we want you to come to West Point. And I'm paraphrasing the conversation here, and we talked some more. And over time, I wanted to go get an MBA. That's what I wanted to do. West Point listened to me, came back to me and said, no, hey, listen, we need you to get a master's in sociology. We don't have enough folks to teach sociology. I took a couple sociology classes as part of my field of study, but I wasn't really in that space. I wanted to get an MBA, but I said, Roger that, yes, sir. And I'm not like saying that like, hey, I'm some sort of martyr. That's what they asked me to do, and that's great. And then I applied to Penn State and a couple other schools that were closer to Philly. And then they came back to me and said, hey, we want you to apply to Maryland. Of course, I'm like, yes, sir. I applied to Maryland. But here's the cool story, right? The cool story is my master's advisor, my dissertation advisor, a guy named David Siegel, also taught me at West Point when he was a civilian teaching at the academy as a rotating civilian. So I established a lifelong relationship with him. But that's how I ended up in Maryland, and I have no regrets. It was perfect.
What is sociology?
Study of people, interactions, dynamics, group dynamics, relationships. The difference, and this is, I'm sure an academic's watching this and is going to be like, hey, this guy's jacked up, but
You got to have a PhD. You're a Dr. Reed, so go
yeah.
ahead. You're an academic.
As opposed to psychology, which is focused more on the individual, sociology is the interplay of the environment, other people, and the individual. And so my dissertation actually is really, I don't want to say, well, it's sort of a non-traditional PhD dissertation. It was on a network of analysis of insurgent networks. So I looked at Saddam Hussein's network. I was the brigade ops officer for that operation. So I had access to the data. I had to declassify it. And then I broke down the network to look at those relationships, to offer a theory, if you will, for how we might look at insurgent networks. And I'm paraphrasing all this, which obviously caused some churn in the academic community because you're using sociology to potentially
Kill people.
contribute.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. But here's the facts are, and I'm like all over the map right now, but the facts are is the Army was paying for my PhD. So there was an element that I needed to provide back to the Army. I was also on a very tight timeline in terms of the collection of data, and my advisor was the one that had offered that as a dissertation topic. So that's probably more than you bargained for by asking me how I ended up at Maryland, but that's kind of it.
Yeah, it seemed like it tied into your leadership funny degree at West Point. So I was wondering if there was more to it, but it sounds like you kind of fell into that.
I did.
Yeah. I know that we've just all the writing you did for us, and we've talked before, emailed back and forth about leadership. Is there one current leader right now who just fascinates you because they're untraditional or contrarian? Could be civilian, could be military, could be political, anybody like, wow, this is really interesting, this style.
Well, yeah, there are a couple. One person that really fascinates me is Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, and it's kind of a hobby, I guess. I like to read about sort of how he does business, how he's built this incredible empire where really nothing rivals the NFL and professional sports. How he's done it, working with the union, working with owners, because that's fascinating to me, right? He actually serves at the pleasure of the owners, but he's got to work. The decisions he makes can't always be in agreement with the owners, right? Because the players' union is going to disagree. So I mean that whole dynamic is really interesting to me. The other one that's interesting to me is less about a person. Well, two others: less about a person and more about a position, and that's the Speaker of the House, regardless of who it is, whether it's Mike Johnson or Nancy Pelosi. It doesn't matter. It's just how that person navigates this political complexity that is really undescribable sometimes. Especially when you've got to get consensus amongst parties. Your party's obviously in the majority if you're the Speaker of the House, but if the president is a different party, that kind of thing. I mean, I could go to town if I ever had the time to just sort of I would love to interview speakers of the house. It's kind of a, but the other thing I would nerd out on is mountain guides. So, having in no way, shape, or form am I presenting myself as some sort of mountain climber. I am recreational at best. And if there's a rung below that, that's probably me. But having been around mountain guides, not only have I found them to be incredible athletes, but incredible leaders, whether it's with a group or one on one. Teachers, resolving conflict, motivating. My dream job someday would be to be a participant observer and do some research on mountain guides and how they lead. And sometimes they lead groups that they don't even know these people, right? When they come together for an expedition. There's a couple groups.
Well, that's really interesting. I've done a lot of work, with mountain guides and guide services, but I never thought of it that way. I wonder if that is parallel to other guiding, but probably not because of the jeopardy and the danger. There's something unique about it.
Yeah, well, and I taught a class at West Point called Leadership in Combat. It's ironic because I took that class as a firstie. It was called Leadership in Combat or Combat Leadership. It's taught by Vietnam vets. And then, you fast forward 25, 30 years later, and I'm teaching that class. And I'm not a Vietnam vet, but I got experience, a lot of experience, obviously in GWAT. So this whole idea of leading in a crisis and leading in dangerous situations is something that's really interesting to me. And I find mountain guides is sort of a untapped kind of population of how do they lead in extremists.
Interesting. I was just taking a look at your resume, and one of the things I've always been kind of fascinated about from the perspective of military officers, especially, is you go into the job to be a leader, but you spend very little of your time actually leading. It seemed like you did okay. It's like I had you down like 3 years as a platoon leader, maybe 2, 3 years, 3, 4 years as company commander. You had a battalion for 3 years and 2 years as a brigade commander, so about 11 years. Is that about right? Of actual time, so about a third of your career then in those positions.
Yeah, that's about right. And that's not uncommon. But I would also, I mean, you're right, being in command positions for sure. And I used to tell my folks this all the time. I mean, everybody's a leader. People are watching you. So you might not be a commander or a platoon leader, but you are a leader and you're a formal leader. But in terms of being in specific positions of command, that's about right.
Why did you stay in the big army? You mentioned West Point. Did you ever think Green Berets or early in your career? Why'd you stay in the big army?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as a lieutenant, yeah, I was definitely interested in going SF because that was kind of the thing of the day in the early 90s. But I decided not to for I really don't know why. Just I didn't. I was married, 2 kids, was in Germany, went to Hawaii. I was just trying to survive. But I did assess for 2 special mission units and was not successful either time. One time for Ranger Regiment, and then another time for the Army's Tier 1 formation. And I don't regret it at all. I don't regret that I was not selected. In fact, well, I'm not glad I wasn't selected, but I don't regret that I wasn't selected. But I'm glad that I put myself out there and went for it. And, it's also given me an opportunity to share with others that, because my advice has always been, because I've received this advice, is, do what you want to do and do it well, and it'll work out. But I'm glad at the end of the day I stayed conventional, even though twice I tried to look at other opportunities, simply because the mission set and leading the soldiers that I led was something that never would have happened, arguably, if I had gone in a different direction.
When you graduated West Point, were you like, I'm going to stay in forever? Did you know you were going to put
No,
in that many years?
no,
I
hell
knew
no,
I knew I wasn't, but
no, no, hell no. I was a five and fly guy, man. I was going
that's
to
what
do
I
my
was. Yeah.
well. That was my plan. That was my plan, and then I just fell in love with the Army and leading soldiers. And my wife and I have been at this together my entire career, and I mean that's the other piece of it, right? I never had to reach a point where, from a personal perspective, that I had to choose my family over my career. We've been part of this our entire lives, so no, it was not the original plan at all.
Where were you when 9/11 happened?
I was at Fort Hood, Texas.
What was your job there?
I was the battalion operations officer for 122 Infantry. Actually, that morning, because we were an hour behind East Coast time. We had just finished up PT, and I came back into my office, and my battalion S2. I mean, it's one of those things like you remember exactly where you were and what happened, right? I just walked back into my office, and my battalion S2 came into my office and said, "Hey, sir, you got to come and see this. There's a plane crash in New York City." So our division, our brigade in particular, and our battalion were just getting ready to pick up what was called at the time DRF, Division Ready Force 1, which was getting spun up 18 hours. And remember, this is on the morning of, the morning of September 11th. Just it was like, all right, we'll see what's going to happen. Of course, by the end of that day, it was entirely different. But we went into the conference room that we had set up as our operations center, and I walked in literally as the second plane flew into the tower, and it was just holy shit. And so, yeah, and the rest things obviously took off from there.
I assume that you had command deployed somewhere. Did you, and where were you?
At that time, or
No, during the subsequent 20 years, I guess.
yeah, yeah. So shortly after that, I went to Gitmo down in Cuba, and I was a task force commander of I don't want to say hodgepodge, but a cross-functional formation. I'll leave it at that, I guess. That was doing detainee operations for all the detainees coming from Afghanistan as part of Joint Task Force 160. It's kind of a long story how that all worked out. And then shortly after that, when I got back to Fort Hood, we ended up deploying in March of 2003 for the ground invasion. So we were originally, 4th ID was originally going to go north through Turkey, but the Turks said no. So all our stuff got diverted south. And then when 3ID, I don't want to say it got held up, but they had the sandstorm and whatnot, and they had an operational pause. There was a rush for us to get our shit off the boats, and probably the most unsafe movement I've ever done in my entire. I wasn't worried about somebody shooting at me. I was worried about driving off the road because everybody was falling asleep or shit was breaking down. It was an unglorious invasion for us, but that was in March of 2003, and that was my first deployment. And then I've had subsequent deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan.
Looking back at that now, one of the questions I have for you is the mark those wars had on you and the military and the country. Certainly, the tone has changed, significantly shift recently. I'm sure you're aware. I think that some people aren't aware of the shift, but the shift has aware. Looking back at that now, how do you feel about the war, your experiences, how the war was conducted? The military is coming over under some serious scrutiny now.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with that question. I mean, my
I mean, because
experience.
were you like a lieutenant colonel then, or captain, or you were right? You kind of went into it as a leadership position right away. Go ahead,
Well, yeah. So I initially was a major,
Major.
battalion 3, XO, and then the brigade 3. And then subsequent deployments, I was a battalion commander, lieutenant colonel. And then subsequent deployments, I was working at the 4-star level for the CENTCOM commander. So I've seen the war progress from a perspective where, you know, it wasn't just about the 25-meter target. It was kind of where we were and where we think we're going to go. And I don't know. I'm not really into revisionist history, but I do think a couple things. One is never underestimate the spirit of the American soldier or the Marine or the sailor. I mean, I saw soldiers do incredible things and put their life on the line unquestionably for their buddy. That just, I mean, it's undescribable, right? And I think the thing that worries me a little bit over time is we're going to forget about that as a country, that the sacrifices that a lot of these people made on the more sort of macro level, or maybe I'll say strategic level. Did I question how we might have prosecuted the war? Of course I did, but I questioned it from my perspective, not understanding the entire picture. And as I think back on
So,
it,
so when you say you question it when you're in it, you were questioning how they were doing
yeah,
things. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, yeah. I wasn't. So I personally never questioned why are we doing this, but I did question at times how we were doing it, and sometimes I was questioning it from the perspective of, someone that was too emotionally invested, right? And and that's always dangerous. The other times I was questioning it, when I was questioning, I didn't understand the big picture. And then once I sort of kind of moved up the food chain and saw the bigger picture, I was questioning it in terms of, hey, do we have the right strategic and national objectives? And the good news, I believe, is that every level I have bosses that allow me to talk to them about it, whether or not they could do something about it or not. I never had a boss that would just shut me down and say, "Hey, shut the hell up. Go back and color between the lines and just do what I tell you." And I think that's a component of good leadership. They may not be able to fix the problem, but they allowed me to iterate with them on it.
Yeah, that's interesting. On one hand, the shift I've kind of just seen. I was listening to some of this yesterday, where um, the idea that America hasn't won a war in a long time, and the revolving door for general officers from military to defense contractors, defense industrial complex, and the total change in the Republican Party, at least in terms of foreign policy, and some elements of that the military itself wants. Is in the war business, and so it's its first answer. It's been really interesting for me to see that, and then the criticism of the military that has kind of bubbled up for that. It seems the criticism is leveled, at the leadership and not at individuals right now. It is. I work with all types of tactical athletes, and it's always interesting to me when we'll lose a military person, a soldier, or something down range, and it'll be national news, and their family get a call by the president, and then we'll lose 18 wildland firefighters in Arizona, and they'll get a call, or a policeman or something all the time. I think the military still has that, but there has been kind of an interesting shift. I'm not too sure that people in the military understand that shift of that heightened scrutiny, or if it's fair. But have you seen that too, or noticed it? Are you concerned about it because it'll affect the soldiers coming after you?
I'm not, and I'm biased, right? Because I just retired in September of 23. In the last 7 years of my career, I was at the military academy. My last year and a half, 2 years there, I was chief of staff. So I wasn't completely integrated in the development of, cadets to be officers in the United States Army. My opinion is that the quality of the young people coming into the Army is as good, if not better, than the quality that came in when you and I entered the military. Is it different? Yeah. Do they have strengths that are different than our strengths? Yeah. Do they have weaknesses that are different than our weaknesses? Yeah. But I don't question the caliber of the person. I certainly don't question how we're training them. I fundamentally just, I think we're okay. I think we're better than okay. Obviously, choosing my words here a little bit carefully in the sense that I just don't think there's this national crisis that we've lost the warrior spirit. Can we do better? Of course, but I don't believe that we've lost the warrior spirit. And I obviously take a little bit of offense to some of the things I've read about. We've never won a war because I've been part of those combats, part of those wars and those combat scenarios, combat situations, and I've lost soldiers in those situations. I think it's more a matter of did we achieve, the objectives that we set for ourselves as a country. That question I can't really answer though, because I don't know what those objectives were. In some cases, I wasn't privy to them. It is interesting. You made a comment about, and I've heard this before. We went away from boots on the ground soldiers to more contractors. Well, part of that was because we were constrained by the number of boots on the ground that we could put, so we had to put contractors there. If you can only put 1,000 soldiers on the ground, but you need 3,000 people, you need a big logistical tail. Well, 2,000 of them are going to be contractors, and that's not a military decision; that's a political decision. So, I think the bigger question, and I'm way out of my pay grade here, is this isn't just a military question. This is a whole of government question in terms of how we see ourselves prosecuting wars in the future. It's just one man's opinion for what it's worth.
I'm sure you've been tracking, the war in Ukraine and how that's developed, and all the drone technology. It's been pretty amazing to see drones plus World War I type trench warfare. Can you give any thought to? I mean, you were big Army, striker brigades, striker battalion, big mechanized, big movements. It seems that that entire execution of warfare might be obsolete. Do you think it's obsolete? And do you have any idea what's going to be replaced with, or any thoughts to that idea?
Yeah, I don't. It certainly would seem that it's obsolete in what we see with Russia and Ukraine, where they've essentially gone to these World War One style trench warfare. And I think, and I'm not an expert on this at all. I've spent zero time inside the Ukraine, and I'm privy to the same kind of information you are. I think part of it is, how we train our leaders to fight. And I think as a military on our side, we've got to make sure that we continue to train fire and maneuver, movement, combined arms. And, that's so when you talk about a striker brigade, the whole impetus behind the formation, the creation of striker formations was to bring the mobility of a heavy force, the lethality of a heavy force, the warrior spirit of a light force, and the ability to think and critically solve problems like special forces. And there's a bumper sticker tagline out there that General Dubik, who was the founder of striker formations, put together that essentially says that. And that's why I love commanding a striker unit, because I had everything I needed as a commander. I had snipers, I had artillery, I had mortars, I had light infantry. That doesn't mean shit if you don't know how to use it, right? If you're not trained on it. And I think that's part of the problem, getting back to a question you asked earlier, part of the problem that we saw over time with the global war on terror is that we became really good at going to a combat outpost or a FOB and doing these sort of team and squad kind of operations, platoon operations, kicking in doors, or doing whatever we had to do at that small unit level. But we lost the art of combined arms warfare. Again, you can have everything you need in terms of equipment in your formation, but if you don't train it, if you don't develop leaders accordingly, if you don't really exercise the art of mission command, then it's probably not going to be effective.
You've seen, recent announcement of budget cuts there at the Pentagon, and 8% a year is what Defense Secretary put out, which is 40% in 5 years, which is significant. And we're already seeing some cutback in the bureaucracy and stuff. Part of that seems to be driven by budgetary concerns, but there's part of it, I think, that's driven by it's just too much bureaucracy, quite a bit of bureaucracy. I don't know if you need to comment on that, but my sense is that the Army and the military is still unaware of the shift that's happened, and at least it's going to be impacted for the next 4 years. Any thoughts about that idea? I didn't see where you had to spend any time at the Pentagon yourself. Did you avoid the Pentagon in your career somehow?
No, in
Oh,
fact,
you did.
my last assignment after West Point, before I officially retired, was at the Pentagon working for the secretary. So it is a big bureaucracy. Whenever you have a big bureaucracy, obviously, well, not obviously, but you're more than likely going to have some overhead that may not be necessary, and that's going to make you less efficient. I do think, and I don't, I don't have any inside baseball on this. I read an article here recently, probably one that you're referring to as well, where there are certain programs were going to get cut. I got personal opinions on those programs, but I also don't know those programs well enough. I think at the end of the day, for me as a retired Army guy, as a taxpayer, I'm trusting my leadership to make the right decisions based off of what they know, based off of threat, based off of where they need to spend their money, based off of how they want to fight wars going forward. And it's somewhere, you're going to have to cut, right? And those are hard decisions. I mean, they are. So I don't know if I answered a question there or just rambled at the mouth, but
Yeah, I don't. It'd be interesting to see, kind of what happens. What are your thoughts about the 4-star firings? The Commandant of the Coast Guard went first, and
yeah.
she was kind of noticed, but she was quick. And we had heard, with the Joint Chief Staff, CNO, thoughts about that in terms of appropriateness, political. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot out there in the press about it, comparing, those that are saying, hey, these firings were inappropriate and they're racially or uh, gender related firings, and then there's others that are saying, hey, this is pretty similar to what we saw in the past with Obama firing McKiernan and McChrystal, or Truman firing MacArthur. I do think that is not a apples to apples comparison. Personally, Truman fired MacArthur because MacArthur disobeyed a direct order and went to the Yalu, and then President Obama uh, relieved General McKiernan and then General McChrystal for performance-related things, and then the Rolling Stone article, and I'm wave top and all that. Obviously, I don't know why the chairman was fired, the CNO, or the commandant of the Coast Guard. Certainly, it would appear to be because there might be a perception that they got their positions because of diversity, equity, and inclusion type policies. But we really don't know. And I'm not defending the firings. I have personal views on it. But, I think, well, I'll put it this way. I read a quote from General Dempsey, who was the former chairman, who said every president and secretary has the right to have leadership in place, their leadership in place, those leaders, who they believe can extend their policies, or words to that effect. I'll say this. Yeah, I don't know any of those individuals very well, but I do think you're at risk of undermining the trust that exists. I think you're at risk of politicizing the military. And I think you're also at risk of going back on some of the stated opinions that we've heard come out of the administration reference DEI, where, hey, part of the problem with DEI was, it was allowing people to get into positions that because of their race or their gender and not their talent. But now, if you're going to nominate a guy off of the retired list to be the new chairman because of his views or his political leanings, that sort of flies in the face of this idea of meritocracy. So I think the messaging, as much as folks may or may not care about it, probably ought to be important. But I do think at the end of the day, it's about our oath as an officer, and that is, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I think that's the most important thing that people need to stay anchored to as serving military officers. That's a long-winded answer to your question. I wasn't intentionally trying to tap dance around anything. It's a profession, and I do worry about the undermining of the professional ethic and expertise by letting these people go. At the end of the day, the president and the secretary, it's within their authority to make those decisions.
When you were a battalion commander, and I've heard this from junior officers in the Army, did you have to rank, or did you rank the the platoon commanders in your command every quarter, every half a year?
Yeah, every year.
And I kind of want to ask you, if you think it's possible to be a quiet professional and have a successful career as an officer in the Army?
Yeah, absolutely. I would prefer you to be a quiet professional, because I think you're going to be not necessarily more successful in your career, but I think you're going to be a better leader. Yeah, I mean, that assumes that the quiet professional will fly under the radar and people won't pay attention to him or her. I don't know. I don't want to. Is that the kind of the impetus of the question?
Well, it seems that part of that, I mean, these junior officers, and I was in there, you're competing with each other,
Yeah.
right? So there is an incentive to not take the dirty job, but to take the more glorious job, high profile job.
Yeah.
They're just, you know what I mean? Go ahead.
Yeah. So we call them spotlight rangers, and you can spot them. You can spot them a mile away. At least I felt like I could. I think the onus is on you as the commander, as the person that sort of rank orders these officers and writes their evaluations. The onus is on you to get it right, ultimately, for the good of the officer and the good of the Army. So, in my view, if you're just going to sit at a dry erase board and rank order 1 through 30 your lieutenants and call it good, you're going to miss something, no doubt. You're going to miss the quiet professional. You will, because you can't see everything. You got 700 soldiers in your battalion, or as a brigade commander, I had 4,500. The way that I would assess my officers on both potential on both performance and potential. So it's twofold. Is I would do my own rank ordering. I would do a pairwise comparison, and then I would bring all my battalion commanders in, and we would go through all the. We'd spend a whole morning going through all the officers, and I would ask you as an example, Rob, if for your opinions on officers in other battalions. Did you ever work with them? And it was a more elaborate process. We have business rules to do this, but the point is that I didn't want to miss anything. So you might have a perspective on an officer that I didn't, or that officer's own battalion commander didn't, and you could offer it. And that in turn would allow me at the end of the day to assess this officer on his or her performance or potential in a way that, is good for the officer and good for the Army. So those quiet professionals, they also mattered. I think that's the other thing is when I got my organization together and laid out my expectations for my officers and my leaders, quiet professionalism was at the top of the list, in terms of being a technical and tactical expert, being competent, caring for your soldiers, leading by example. None of it's rocket science, but you could start to sense and pick up who those quiet professionals are.
In doing those rankings, wasn't it impossible sometimes to? I mean, did you have like a 1, 2, 3, and then like 4 through 15, and it's just hard to divide them?
Well,
but those rankings matter, right, for the officer's career. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the way the OER system works or worked, and I'm pretty sure it works this way today, is my profile. I can only have 49% of my officers in a top tier. Everyone else has got to be below that, and otherwise your profile is invalid. So you've got to make tough calls. I always believe that you were wrong if you said to an officer, hey, I can't give you a top block because I don't have room in my profile. To me, that's bullshit. That's a cop out. There's a reason you got the top block and Joe over here didn't. And there's a reason for that. And I owe it to you to explain that. I didn't, except for like the top 1, 2, or 3, when I wrote an officer's report, I didn't tell them where they racked and stacked. What I focused on is how I assess their performance, how I assess their potential, and those areas for improvement, and what they need to do or what they ought to do or should do or think about going forward. Unless you were the number one guy, very rarely did I say, hey, you're like number 10. Although I did say on one report, this is the worst officer I've ever served with, but that was pretty obvious for a lot of reasons.
Now I want you to, if you can, step out of your uniform, step into your bespectacled, nerdy PhD sociology guy. Just from a sociology of inner workings, people working together, isn't that system a little fucked up?
Yeah, because they could, it's like Hunger Games,
Right.
In fact, I've referenced Hunger Games a couple times when I was picking lieutenants for certain jobs. I was joking, of course, but I'd be like, hey, you 3 are all like in competition to be the scout platoon leader. I think I'm just going to let you go Hunger Games on one another, and whoever comes out can be the scout platoon leader. But yeah, I don't think it's optimal, but I think it depends a lot on the commander and how the commander, I don't want to say sells it, but how the commander talks about it and uses the system. It is the system. It's how we evaluate officers' performance and potential. And if you do it right, there's an art and a science to it as a commander. Nobody teaches you this shit, which is something I bitched about for a long time and tried to teach my field grades as I became a senior officer, because you don't learn how to do this shit. When you go to the command course, at least we didn't, nobody tells you, hey, this is how you manage your profile or this is how you assess talent. I mean, it was a gap, right? So, but it's just something I spent a lot of time, and I don't want to say that like I'm patting myself on the back, but it is. I mean, it's a fucked up system to a degree, but it's going to be really jacked up if the commander who's managing it doesn't know what the hell he or she is doing or weaponizes it. So if you ever pitch it as, a him against her kind of thing, then you failed. So that's a long answer to the question. I don't have a better answer. I haven't given it much thought in terms of how to fix it. I think the civilian system, at least the company that I'm a part of now, it's a different system, but it's actually still fairly similar. Only a certain amount of people can get, an outstanding, right? It's just the way it is. What's funny is cadets at the academy, just go on a quick tangent here related to this. They complain all the time about force distribution because they get their military ratings, and its system's gotten better. They get their military ratings, and it's a compilation of your assessment of somebody, their peers' assessment, my assessment as the TAC or whatever, and only a certain amount of people can get the number one rating. And they complain all the time. Oh, this forced distribution. This is BS. Blah 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 blah. And I'm like, stop. Okay. Now that I'm a civilian, I want to go back there and say, hey, this shit's never going away, man. It's just the way it is. The problem is that if it's in the hands of a person that doesn't know how to use it or use it for good, then it's definitely gonna be effed up.
As you were coming up through the ranks, and I guess at some point you had to decide you were going to stay in. Usually, that 10-year mark for most people around their major side, or the entire career. Did you look for jobs that would help propel you forward? Did you? I mean, it seems like you have a fairly traditional. You know what I mean? I mean, your career, other than the time teaching in the time at West Point, is fairly common. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good
I mean,
question.
did you play the game? I guess my answer to.
Not really. I mean, once I decided, so the short answer is not really, which is kind of a bullshit response. But going to West Point, less so today, but more so back in the late '90s, was essentially thought to be a kiss of death. You were taking a step outside the operational force. You're going to grad school. You're going to be teaching at West Point.
It's like 4 years away from
4 years away from troops.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know what would have happened to me if 9/11 didn't happen. Because the minute I went to grad school, 96 to 98, taught the academy 98 to 2000, 2001, I went to Leavenworth for CGSC, which is an Army school. Popped out of there, went right to a unit. 9/11 happened. Once I realized that I wanted to be a battalion commander, which I probably realized that my first deployment, like, this is what I want to do. Yeah, I knew I had to have certain jobs in order to get to be a battalion commander. So it's not so much about playing the game, but more about doing those jobs that you need to do in order to continue to matriculate forward.
When you probably had an idea of what being a battalion commander was like, and then you got there. There had to be some disappointment on how little power you had actually to make change. Can you think of anything specifically? I can just give you the example. I went, and one time we put out, hey, we want to come train with a big Army unit, and had a battalion commander down at Fort Hood bring us down. I said, don't tell the lawyers.
Yeah.
And he had to move. Oh my God! Like we just wanted. I'll just give an example. The stuff he had to do from above and below was amazing. Because one of the things we wanted to do, hey, we want to come down. We want to work with soldiers. There's only 2 coaches. We can't work with 1,000 dudes from 6 to 7, right? So we need to be able to train from 7 to 8, 8 to 9. And oh my God, first there were the safety Nazis, the PTs on staff. This is kind of before H2F.
Yeah.
And then you had the people at the mess hall. Then you had the squad leaders. I mean, it was amazing. He was squeezed from the bottom and then from the top. We told him we do it for free. We came in, and his brigade commander actually came in one day, and he's right there standing. And he says, "How much you charging for this?" I'm like, we're doing it for free. Didn't he tell you that? I could even trust his own battalion commander. And I came away thinking, man, these guys just don't have that much fucking power.
Yeah, I actually did not have that experience. And I think
Good.
part of it was I was up at Fort Wainwright in Fairbanks. And so we were essentially a separate brigade. I was a battalion commander in that formation. And then later I went back and commanded the brigade, and I'm the senior mission unit commander. My division commander is 6 hours south in Anchorage. I know when he's coming up, which is a whole separate funny story. But my point is I felt like I had great autonomy as a battalion commander. I think part of it was, now, was I constrained by budget? Yeah. Yeah, I was constrained by budget. I only could spend a certain amount of money. So, but I wasn't really dictated to what I had to spend my money on. I mean, there were certain, there's bins of money, like only this amount of money can go for maintenance, but then you got all this money to do with essentially whatever you want, whatever. But I never felt so constrained, like, shit, I can't do my job. I had a battalion sergeant major who I've written about in a couple articles I wrote for you, who was the best soldier I ever served with. And we decided early on that, we wanted to make our battalion Ranger Regiment like in terms of training standards. We were going to live fire the crap out of our systems. If 1-5 wasn't going to use their ammo, we were going to use it, kind of thing. I mean, we had some discipline issues, and we set up what was called School Soldier, which got the lawyers a little fired up. But I had the top cover of the division commander, and a lot of funny stories out of that. But the truth is that I think part of the reason we may not have felt it like what you described is the environment was different, the culture was different up there. And I was in command for 3 years. It was the
Yeah,
height of
you
the
had it 3
war.
years, which is unusual, right? It's generally 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I never really felt constrained either as a battalion or brigade commander. Did I feel frustrated at times because I couldn't get the chow I wanted to in the DFAC, or I couldn't get what I wanted in the gym? Yeah, okay, definitely. Or I could only use these certain hours to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, that's first world problems. We just figured out a way to work around it.
Was of all your leadership jobs, which one was the most fun? Was it platoon? Was it company? Was it battalion? Was it brigade?
Most fun. I will tell you, somebody once said to me, battalion command is the perfect intersection of experience and exposure. So as a lieutenant, you've got all this exposure up here, but you got very little experience.
What explain
And
exposure?
exposure to soldiers. You're with soldiers all the time, so you got all this exposure, but you've got little experience. And then it starts to get closer as a company commander. You're getting more experience. You've still got good exposure. But once you hit battalion command, it's that perfect intersection of exposure and experience. I mean, you are legitimately the most experienced infantryman in the formation. I mean, you're at 15, 16 years. You're the quarterback. You're under center. You're Jalen Hurts with the football on the goal line, kind of thing, fulfilling. And when you become a brigade commander, you've got more experience, but you've got less exposure. You're more up and out. I guess I'd put it this way, I'm not sure fun. I had fun in every job. I loved them all. But if somebody said you can only go back and do one job, what would it be? It would probably be battalion command for that reason. The experience, exposure. And the other piece is I was in command for 3 years. And you could do a lot in 3 years. 2 years is too short.
When you looking back on that battalion command experience, when you first got there and then what you learned in command, what area of your leadership was the most deficient when you first got there in hindsight?
Most deficient? Empathy for sure. It took command coming off an extension in Iraq from 12 to 16 months. We were authorized roughly 700 soldiers in the battalion. I had like 1,200. It was chaos. I thought I was going to get fired. It was just like anarchy. We had a company that led the army in drug offenses. It was just a hot mess. I have a hard copy of a memo because it didn't go out over email where it said battalion commanders get control of your barracks. And I had no empathy, man. I was like, okay, you want to fuck around in my barracks? I'm kicking you out of the army. I was going to say never once. That's not true. It didn't take me long to figure it out, or it did take me long to get my shit straight with the help of my sergeant major and my leaders, because, I was all focused on cleaning house and getting rid of all these people that, just couldn't do what it was that we expected them to do. When in reality, so part of the problem was us. We had created an environment and conditions where they couldn't be successful. Plus, oh, by the way, it's December and January in Fairbanks.
I've been there in Fairbanks again, December,
I
January.
saw it. So
Yeah,
empathy was not my strong suit. I don't think I would argue it's still not my strong suit. I don't think it really started to develop in a more positive way until I got to West Point as the brigade tactical officer. But empathy.
Did you ever, as brigade commander, do you ever have to relieve a battalion commander?
No, I didn't. Well, number one is I can't relieve him. That's the division commander. But I never recommend. The reason I'm pausing is I did have a battalion commander that had gotten into some trouble. There was a discussion about whether or not he should remain in command. at the end of the day, he did. So I've never relieved never recommended relief of a brigade of battalion commander.
You didn't have to go to battalion commander selection school that is in place now, did you? What do you
No.
think about that school? Have you heard about it? What do you think about it?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, when I was at West Point, there were some folks on the faculty there that had a lot to do with standing up that school. I think it's fine. I mean, I'm sort of, I don't want to say agnostic about it. I'm not convinced it's any better than what we've done before, mainly because I haven't really looked at the data. But, I think the last time I looked at or read an article about it, I don't know if the talent that we were selected for command was noticeably different than the talent we had picked before under the centralized promotion system. I do think, however, that when you have the opportunity to put a couple other metrics into the equation as opposed to what's on a file that you're looking at, it's probably not a bad thing. The only thing I do worry about with the current system is this idea of peer evaluations, or not even peer evaluations. They're sort of like, if I'm competing for command and you get an evaluation on me and you just thought I was an ass, regardless of whatever, and you just like, hey, Reed's an ass. Hey, we got this evaluation, it said you were an ass. How do I defend that? I don't know. Who was it? I thought he was an ass too. I mean, that's the only danger I think sometimes in the system, but I give credit to the people that make those decisions. They're smart enough to recognize those kind of one-off. So I think the short answer to the question is I think it's fine. I would see no reason not to get rid of it.
I sent you. I don't know if you're able to watch that deal from that professor there. I think he's at Harvard, Jeffrey Sachs, and it's kind of a different idea of geopolitics now. There's been a significant shift with the Trump administration, I think, in the country. I don't know if you'd call it America First foreign policy. We actually had a guy who's taking a battalion really soon named Matt Lensing, and he did an article for me a couple years ago on the Monroe Doctrine. There's a new deep water port down there in Peru, and no one's spoken about that. So we're a little bit ahead here, but certainly the idea is America is too extended. Let's take care of the Western Hemisphere. We don't need to be out there and involved in all these other countries. And if you trace it back, they quote George Washington as the guy who kind of started this, right?
Yeah.
But certainly, I mean, you've seen the stuff with Ukraine now, pulling back from NATO. Yeah, I think I did a deal on a RET where there was movement in South Korea to get their own nukes because there's a concern that the U.S. won't cover South Korea anymore with their nuclear umbrella, which prevents North Korea and China. That brings in Japan possibly, and Japan has been spending more in the military. But we have the same situation in Japan, as NATO we do in Pacific. Have you thought about that stuff? What do you think about it? I don't know if you need to say whether or not you agree with the policy. I think this shift is going to be happening, but how the military may or may not be prepared for that.
Yeah, I did not have a chance to watch the video. By the way, I do know Matt Lensing, great guy. I believe we were at West Point at the same time. He's obviously younger than I am. But yeah, policy wise, it's funny. In my Army career, I went to West Point in '85. I remember as I'm walking the hallways of West Point one day, there's an announcement that comes over the speaker, pre-internet days, obviously, that said, "We just bombed Libya." And, Ronald Reagan was just laying waste to Omar Gaddafi. And everyone's like, yeah, that's great. Where the hell's Libya? Blah, blah. I guess my point is, I graduate in '89, Cold War, when I'm in Ranger School, the Berlin Wall comes down. And, we've had these periods that I've lived throughout my career of shifts in foreign policy, and we've adapted. And I think the shifts in policy are going to continue certainly over the next 4 years and beyond. And we're going to need to adapt as a military. When I was a brigade commander, I was set to deploy to Afghanistan, and then we got off ramped and we got pushed to the Pacific because Pacific Pathways was kicking up, and the pivot to the Pacific began with the United States Army. We put a 4-star out there at U.S. Army Pacific. It used to be a 3-star billet, now it's a 4-star, and that was to emphasize the importance of the Pacific from the Army's perspective. I find I'm not a foreign policy expert. I'm kind of a nerd on it. Even though I've worked at the Pentagon and whatnot, I enjoy reading about it and thinking about it. I think it's a it's one of those, what do you call it, wicked problems, right? Where do you resources are finite. Where do you view the threat? Why do you view the threat that way? That's where our resources have to go. The only thing I will say is I do believe alliances are important. And I do believe that we have obligations to our partners, just as our partners have obligations to us. And I think that is the one thing that worries me, not worries me, but as I read what's going on with the Ukraine is it's been an important country for us. And it's just one that, I hope we continue to pay attention to.
I remember. I can't remember when it was. Actually, as a junior in high school, I went through Checkpoint Charlie in East Berlin.
I did too.
Oh, really? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Go ahead.
When I was a cadet, I went on CTLT my summer right before my first year. I went to cadet troop leadership training. I went to Garlstadt, Germany for 1 Infantry, and my sponsor took me on a ride. We drove through Checkpoint Alpha, Checkpoint Bravo, and Checkpoint Charlie, and I was in my white over gray, my cadet uniform, because you had to wear it. And you're sitting at attention. You're not supposed to make eye contact with these guys. And then I go back to Germany as my first assignment. And the wall had just come down, and I remember vividly. I showed up, just graduated Ranger School, headed on out there, and we go out to the border because that was our mission, the GDP border mission. But I'm like, the wall just came. What are we doing? I mean, I'm just a second lieutenant. I'm not being consulted on these matters, but this seems kind of weird, kind of jacked up. So, yeah,
As I was thinking about this question this morning, I was thinking about Turkey and Israel. And
yeah,
if Turkey did something and Israel attacked Turkey, Turkey's in NATO.
yes,
We need to, come to. It's just really confusing now. Things are definitely shifting for sure.
yeah,
It's really
yeah,
interesting. You're familiar with my happiness formula. What's your happiness formula?
yeah. I was kind of when I saw that question. I'm stalling because I don't have a clean answer.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. You're what, 57, 58 years old. You got to have this shit figured out by now, Brian.
Yeah, I don't have shit figured out. I think that's part of my problem. 58. I'll be 58 May. I mean, my happiness formula. I like no debt for sure, right? But it's my kids, my grandchildren for sure. And I think you know one thing I was never good at that I'm trying to be much better at is being more appreciative of the moment I'm in. I read the article you wrote, Winds. What was it called? Winds.
Wind in my face, yeah.
Wind in my face, right? And I think my happiness formula is tied to that. It's being appreciative of what I've got right now. It's certainly my children and my grandchildren. It's the ability to work in a job that I never thought I'd have post military. But the reason I do struggle with it a little bit, Rob, to be honest with you, is the transition. It's harder than I thought it would be, and it's one of those things I haven't put my finger on in terms of why. But it's something I'm still trying to figure out.
Well, it's been, let's see, over a year now. I mean, and you retired. You're down in Pentagon, I guess, in a new setback. How close are your kids and your family to you now up there in New York? Are they close?
Yeah, well, that's why we settled where we did.
Got it. Yeah,
I would quite honestly would love to have retired in Alaska.
I figured. Yeah,
Yeah, and my wife likes Alaska, but the truth of the matter is our family's on the East Coast, and so one of the things you wrote in the happiness formula, I think, is sort of access to you know being able to walk out your door and go hunting and hiking and whatnot. Where we live in the Hudson Valley, I'm able to do that. Not quite exactly like walk out my back door, but the Catskills are closed, the Adirondacks are closed, the Whites are closed. I've got numerous hiking trails and whatnot around me, so that's a positive. Our kids are not terribly far. Our grandchildren, they're an hour, 15 minutes away. I got a son up in college at Syracuse, and then another daughter down in Philly. So the proximity to them is close, which was an important consideration for us. So I don't know. As I'm talking this out to you, maybe I'm figuring out my happiness formula.
I remember I had a boss in the Coast Guard, and he had previously been the aide to the commandant, and he told this story that one time the commandant, after this person had retired, went back to headquarters at the Coast Guard and ran into the door, the window door, because he had been so used to having the door open for him. It was just like, he had never done that. So, I mean, tell me about this transition. I mean, you're working for Google now, if I remember right. Tell me what your job is now, remind me, and tell me about this transition.
Yeah, so I mean, I've really been blessed in that respect. I ended up into a great job, and the job transition's been fantastic. I think some of it's kind of the identity transition, which I didn't think it was going to be a thing, but it is. But yeah, I work for Google. I work on the security operations side of things. I'm responsible for I'm the lead for learning and development and validations for the Americas. So North, South, Central America, all the SecOps folks that are part of that organization. I assist with the training, learning and development. I do leadership classes, that type of thing. I work out of the New York City office, so the commute is something I'd rather not do at times. I mean, it's 2 hours, but on the flip side, it's on the train. I'm able to get some work done, and it's not terrible. I'm not complaining at all. I mean, it's actually a great gig. I think some of the things, though, transition wise, has been just not so much finding my tribe per se, and not about walking in the door. I mean, I retired as a general officer, but I never had an aide or any of that shit.
You
In
didn't have
fact, I
aid?
was no, no. I drove my own car. No, I think it's not necessarily the camaraderie either, because there is good camaraderie, and I've made some very good friends. I think some of it is I miss. I don't know. It's like the adrenaline of the job. West Point, even though I spent a lot of time at West Point, when I think back to my Army career, I think of battalion command, brigade command, leading troops in combat. And those times are never coming back. And I told a friend recently, which I've been trying to do myself, is hey, I'm going to go visit those places in my mind, but I ain't going to live there. I'm not staying. I'm moving forward. So it's actually been things have been pretty damn good for sure. But
Did you get out with gritted teeth? I mean, is your life like putting the screws to you? Your wife saying, "Time to get out"? Did
no,
you have Did you have to get out? Could you stayed in?
yeah, I could have stayed till 64. I'll be 58, so I could have stayed whatever 7 more years, right? I mean, I retired 2 years ago, so I guess I was 55, something like that. But no, I did not have to retire. I chose to retire. Part of the reason was it's twofold. One is, I felt like I was losing my relevancy in the sense that I was in a job and I was going to stay at West Point at that point because I wasn't going to go anywhere else. Um, and I just felt I was starting to feel disconnected a little bit. So I started to kind of question my relevancy. But I think more to the point, I just felt it was time. And when I was a young officer, somebody said to me, "Hey, you'll know when it's time." I've heard people say when it stops being fun. It doesn't apply to me. I mean, it's always been fun, but I just knew it was time, and I don't regret it at all. I don't look back and say I wish I didn't retire at all. I think it's just a matter of I think I wish I would have thought through it a little bit more. Like if I had to do it again, the one piece of advice I give is I'd take a gap year.
Not go right to try to work. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had junior officers, even academy grads, come to work for me and seen them struggle because there's no manual for them. There's no one to ask. I'll say, just go figure it out. And the support systems in the military are pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Just in terms of, you have all the support. Is that something that, were you caught off balance when that was gone?
Yeah, you cut out there a second, Rob. I missed the
Yeah,
last part there.
when you retired and you didn't have that structure, were you caught off?
No, not per se. I think part of it is, when you do something for as long as I did, I joined the Army at 17 when I went to West Point in 85, and then 38 years you come out on the back end. I mean, there is just this, as I've come to look back and realize this, there is just this natural change in how you live your life and how you do things and the people you interact with. And it wasn't support wise because I found that I could reach out to buddies. Like I didn't reach back to Big Army. I reached out to, Mike Coffey or Ray Folks or Edwin Brooks or Eric Hammer or Jeremiah Hurley, and the list goes on, right? So I didn't I didn't find that lacking. What I think I found a little bit was also kind of part of what's next, right? So as part of my Army career, every 2 to 3 years, even my last 7 years at West Point, I had I had three different jobs. So now where I'm at now, I love my job and I'm not looking to leave. So if anybody from Google watches this, hey, I ain't looking to leave. But part of it is the natural turnover of jobs every 2 to 3 years
Yeah.
begins. You pick up momentum. You wrote about it, changing careers, and that you're right. There's an excitement that you can't explain going into a new job.
Is your current boss at Google a lot younger than you? Because the chances are in the military you never had a boss who wasn't older than
No, he's not. He's a few years younger than me.
you. How you deal with
Yeah.
that?
I love him. He's a great boss. He's a great dude.
Good
No,
answer.
no, I'm too good with it. You try to set me up there.
Yeah, just it's not clear to me how much exposure you have to the individuals there at Google, but um, just in terms of the quality of the people, or maybe just the quality of the thinking or the systems. Maybe you don't need to compare them, but just in terms of what you've seen from Google, especially you step back in your PhD role and the way they do their leadership, the way they do the evaluations, the way they incentivize performance, deal with low performers and stuff. Is there anything that you look back and say, wow, that's interesting?
So the quality of people, I think is fantastic in the group, the folks that I work with. Obviously, Google's an enormous corporation, but inside sort of the folks that I deal with on a regular basis or a semi-regular basis, I think it's a lot of good quality people for sure. How they bring people on board, I think is interesting. And there's some things that we can learn from them in the Army, and there's some things I could teach them, I believe, in terms of how you onboard people, how you socialize people to an organization. I think, we're able to offer with what we have from our experience in the military and what we do at Google in the physical security space. I think we can offer some systems to provide some more rigorous assessments of threats and how you might want to deal with a threat, as opposed to just kind of looking at it and sort of guesstimating, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but it's a great place to work for sure, and really good people. And I do think I'm better because of it, because there are folks that don't think like me, and aren't interested in your war stories, right? Nobody gives a shit that you did whatever as a lieutenant, whatever, man. You're just an old guy telling your war stories, and I don't care, because I do work, even though my boss isn't younger than me, much younger than me. I do work with people on my team, and I work with people regularly who are a lot younger than me. Um, and I don't want to be like the grandfather, the grandpa guy. Back in my day, we had typewriters. That's how I wrote my paper. Nobody gives a shit about that. It's so part of it, I guess I'll stop with this, is part of it is never being too old to learn from others. And I don't think that's something that I had to figure out. I've always felt that I've been able to do that, learn from soldiers, learn from my NCOs. But, as you walk into the civilian world, especially as an older guy, just an older guy with more experience, you don't have the market cornered on good ideas. There's a lot of fucking people here that are really smart and that could share with you, how to maybe do something better, and you got to be open to it.
Or is the most people that you work with are ex-military or have ex-federal LE or something like that?
So, former LE, former law enforcement, military, corporate security, that's generally the backgrounds of most of the folks inside what's called GSRS, Google Security Resilience Services, or Global Security Resilience Services, which is the overarching physical security apparatus for Google. Like if you came down to the office here in New York, you'd be greeted by security guards. You'd have to badge in or sign in, and they're managed. They're kind of like companies, platoons, companies, battalions. So layers of leadership. It's not an exact parallel, but it's pretty close.
I have a good friend, he's a master sergeant, command sergeant major in the Army. Went to work for a defense contractor, and his boss was, I think, like a former two-star. And he's like, it's kind of like I just get out of what I was in, because the idea of a company, there is some time and grade that you need for the military to move up the ranks. Not so in the civilian world. If you're a top performer, you can skip ahead. I don't know if you can comment about that, but I wonder if you've ever felt resentment from some of the guys who maybe work for you because you are a former general. You know what I mean?
Well, number one, I don't advertise that, but the word has gotten out, and I catch a lot of shit for it. Which you got to be able to laugh at yourself, and I'm kind of the king of that.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I'm very. I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but yeah, I'm very conscientious of the fact that I came into a company and joined a team where people had worked to get to where they were, and then I show up and I'm their peer, right? Just based off of my military experience. So, with that thought in mind, I want to be a good teammate. I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm going to be on time. I'm going to help you. And I think it's about just being a good, and you've got to earn it, right? It's like anytime you go to an organization, you've got to earn the trust of others, whether it's in the military or even here at Google. I do think sometimes, and I felt this too. Hey, I'm retired as a senior guy. I want to go into a senior job, but it doesn't work that way, right? It just doesn't. And I just was counseling an officer. Counseling. I was chatting with an officer who's leaving the retired and he wants to go into a real senior position. And I'm like, it's just not going to work that way. I mean, maybe you'll catch lightning in a bottle, but I think part of it is, being humble and humility matters.
Father and being a husband, looking back at your, I guess, to this point, any big regrets, something you could have done better?
Yeah. Yeah. I sucked as a father sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. Um, people would ask me, how do you maintain balance? What's balance like? And I'd be like, don't ask me. I don't know what it looks like. I failed at it. I'm not sure balance is actually achievable, to be quite frank with you. I just don't think it's achievable. But yeah, there was a moment. I'll tell you a quick story when I was working actually for General Austin at the time, and he had told me, "Hey, go do this." And what he told my son, who was a little guy at the time, he's second or third grade or something. Hopefully, he'll never watch this podcast because he would kill me for telling this story. But he was a crossing guard, and it was like he was the crossing guard of the month at his school. We were at McDill, and they were having this breakfast to honor the crossing guards. And it was one of the few times that I was actually in Tampa. I was traveling mostly with the boss, but and I was like, "Hey, I'll be there, man." It was like 7 o'clock in the morning, and then some shit kicked off in the Middle East, and I was like, "No, I got to go to the office because I'm so non-replaceable. They're never going to survive without me." That was my mindset, and I remember telling my son that, "Hey, I'm not going to make it," and the look on his face was just. It was heartbreaking, to this day. I just get emotional about it. So anyway, I went and I got a picture in my office at home of the two of us, him in his little road guard vest, me in my uniform. Of course, I went to work after that. And you know what, man? I don't know what the hell the crisis of the day was. Whatever it was, they dealt with it just fine. Brian Reed didn't need to be there. The unfortunate reality is, more often than not, I would skip out, and that's my biggest regret. And those moments are never coming back, And so, I don't want this to be therapeutic, but you asked the question, that's the answer.
Did your wife, did you go through a divorce? You've been married to the same woman the whole time?
Yeah, yeah, we got married. Got married 5 days before I went to Ranger School. I'm not a marriage counselor, but my advice is don't get married 5 days before you go to Ranger School, and then recycle Ranger School. 2 phases of Ranger School. Fuck yeah, she's a saint, man. She's a saint.
Was she able to have a career, or she just, bounced around and go
She
ahead?
no, she wasn't able to have a career, but she worked odd jobs, especially as we were growing up as lieutenant. The money was tight. We had 2 kids. She did shit that was, I won't say below her because it wasn't below her, but she could have done a lot more career wise. But she's a great mom, great grandmother, a great wife, and it's actually pretty awesome to be able to do this journey with her.
So interesting. Are you faithful?
Yes,
Really? Tell me about that.
yes. Yeah, so I'm what you would call a cradle Catholic. I was born Catholic, went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, then went to West Point. My faith is just, I've had my moments throughout my life of, questioning my faith and questioning certain things, but I've never wavered very far from my faith. And it's a lot of it's also how I've sort of squared up my time in combat. Like, hey, if I catch a bullet to the head or my vehicle blows up today, and it's going to be all right. And I know my family will be taken care of, and so everybody's got their own thing. And but I was also very careful of not pushing my faith on my soldiers. In fact, I had to square away an officer who he was you call it prophesizing in a way that it was undermining sort of good order and discipline of the formation. I had to pull him in, and I'm like, you can't do that shit, man. You can be faithful, live your life, but you can't be handing out you know religious paraphernalia to your soldiers. You can't do that. Uh, But yeah, I'm faithful.
And have you? I guess you've been able to go to, or are you able to attend, or have you attended church every Sunday throughout your career? So it was always a big part of your life.
Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, when you're deployed,
Tough.
Sunday is whenever the priest shows up. Um, I had chaplains that were my chaplains as commanders, and I would support their religious services and whatnot. But yeah, no, I was raised in a pretty strict Catholic household, and some folks kind of rebelled under that. It wasn't lunacy, but it established sort of a baseline for me. So yeah, I'm a practicing, I guess you would say, Catholic.
If you think back about your own career as a leader, is there one mistake you made that just haunts you?
I made a lot of mistakes. Anytime I made a mistake that I either lost my temper or didn't step in to deal with the situation the way I should have. Those are ones that sort of linger with me. The one, and I've written about this, I think, is when I was a lieutenant. I've never forgotten this. 4 years at West Point, the honor code: not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I walk out. I'm a lieutenant. I'm at the EIB, Expert Infantryman Badge testing, and we're doing night land nav and navigation. You can't have a map. It's dead reckoning. Your compass in the dark, moving from point A to point B. Anyway, bunch of guys cheated. I knew it. They had a cheat sheet. They had a map. Now, I did not cheat. I did not have a map. I didn't take part in any of that. But I did nothing about it. And I've shared this story with cadets, and I'll ask them, I'll leave it there, I'll tell them the story, and I'll say, "What do you think I did?" And you'll get the whole range of answers. Well, sir, you confronted them, of course, because you were a cadet. A cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, and you told them that was wrong, and you took their map. To sir, you did nothing. To one who was like, you took their map and used it, which is the funniest one. I did nothing, and I've never forgotten that. And I did nothing because I was a coward. Now, it doesn't mean that I would have turned them in. In fact, I probably never would have turned them in. Hindsight being 2020, I would have confronted them and said, "Hey, this shit's a no-go, guys. Toss it out. Don't use the map." I wouldn't have turned them in. I can almost guarantee that. But the fact that I did nothing because I was too scared, because I was a coward, that's one that has always stuck with me 35 years later, and one that I've used to share with soldiers and cadets.
Give me another one.
Yeah, the other one, I mentioned losing my temper. I was a battalion commander, and we were out at the National Training Center up on a live fire range, and we're getting ready to deploy to Iraq. And these are qualifying platoon live fires, in terms of certifying the platoons. And this platoon was like a complete shit show, man. I mean, I almost got shot. Sergeant Major almost got shot. We're just walking. It was a mess. The platoon leader had no control. So I just friggin' called a ceasefire, popped like whatever purple, red smoke, said this shit's over, gathered the whole platoon. Like, I didn't consult anybody. I didn't consult my sergeant major, who was the greatest soldier I ever served with. I just went off on the platoon, fired the platoon leader on the spot, literally fired the dude. I literally said, "You're fired." Fired the platoon sergeant. I'm starting to move people around, put people in charge. And then I stormed off, yelled at the company commander, who was a great commander, but yelled at him. Anyway, a couple hours later, the dust settles, and I say to my sergeant major, I was like, "Man, I fucked that up. I should have lost my temper." And I thought he would say to me, "Yeah, you know what, sir, it's all right. They deserved it." Instead, He goes, "You're right. You never should have lost your temper." He said, "You're a professional. You're the battalion commander. You can never lose your temper." So those are two big situations. Not horrendous. Nobody died because of them, but that I think have always stuck with me and shaped my leadership.
Can you describe the worst leader you ever worked under?
I could definitely describe him. Bottom line is he was unethical.
Unethical in his personal life or professional life?
Professional life. I
Okay.
don't think he was. I don't think he was unethical in his personal life. I suspected he probably was, but I don't know that. But he was unethical. And part of this dealt with some things that happened downrange, which I probably ought not to go into too much detail on. But when I confronted him about it, this is a kind of a different situation because I actually confronted him.
He was your boss.
He was my boss, and I confronted him at a time where, yeah, I probably could have lost my job, I guess, but I wouldn't. I mean, something had to be done because the other reason was it was obvious to a lot of people that something was wrong here, and it just sort of naturally fell to me to do something about it. But I confronted him about it, and you know, his reaction was to smoke the shit out of me. I mean, he didn't drop me for push-ups, but I haven't been yelled at that bad since I was a plebe at West Point. And I literally reverted to my four responses, like yes sir, no excuse, sir, I do not understand. I probably did not use the last one, but I was locked up at the position of attention as a major, get my ass chewed in front of about 30 other people. Hey, I got no problem getting my ass chewed, but don't be chewing my ass because you're wrong and I called you on it. And oh, by the way, I didn't confront him in front of these people. He basically drugged me in front of them. But that's probably the worst. And it's kind of sad because there's so many good qualities about the guy. But that's the one thing that I'll never forget. I almost got out of the Army because of that.
You're just so disappointed in that
Yeah,
individual.
yeah. It left a really bad taste in my mouth, but it also demonstrated to me that when you work for bad leaders, and I heard you talk about this on a previous podcast with somebody, how do you work for a bad leader? Well, for me, I work for a bad leader by focusing on the soldiers I'm serving and the larger mission because they still need they need good leadership. And it's you got to be careful because you can't undermine the boss as well. So anyway, that's probably the worst.
How are you holding up physically now? How are your knees? How's your low back? If you had a hip replacement like me, how are you doing?
Well, how you doing, man? Same as you. Nah, yeah, my joints hurt. I got arthritis. I got a plate and 8 screws hold my foot together. I got a new hip. Got a plate in my wrist. All that to be said, yeah, I'm doing great. I can't. This is not to suck up to you, obviously, but I use programming and I use it for a reason because it's effective and it's tailored to. I think a lot of the things are tailored to guys like you and me. So I got to be more careful about what I eat, what I drink. That's probably physically. Yeah, it's the same thing, right? You get up in the morning, I make old man sounds. Takes me about 5-10 minutes to get the fuck out of bed. 3 cups of coffee, go into my gym in the garage. But I get after it, right? I think the biggest thing as I get older is being more mindful of my nutrition and being more disciplined in that space. But it's good.
When you look back on your Army career and your time in the military, do you have any resentment towards that career because you missed out on doing something that you couldn't have done because of the commitments? Like you wanted to go to New Zealand for, a backpacking trip or something like that. Anything like that that comes to mind?
No,
No.
no, I don't.
What was the best part of Alaska?
Everything,
Fairbanks
the
is a
hunting,
wild place. Yeah,
it
I've been there.
is,
Oh yeah, it's
man.
wild.
I never hunted in my life till I went to Alaska. That was great. I love the winters. I love the community. Truthfully, probably the best part about Alaska is the community, the larger Fairbanks community. My best friends are still there that I would call my best friends and my family. So that was, and the training and the type of soldiering that goes on there. I mean, it's no joke. You got to be, I mean, it's Arctic tough for a reason. And it brought a certain element of grit, resilience, and toughness that, you know, I would argue may not be the same in other formations.
Yeah, I taught a course in Fairbanks. I was stationed in Juneau for 3 years, and so I traveled all over the state as part of that. But went back up after I started strength coaching and taught a course in Juneau. And we were driving, oh dark. I forget what it was, but it was probably 10 in the morning, or no, I guess it would have been earlier. It was dark all the time, and it was 20 below, and there were guys out there running.
Yeah.
For PT, they're out there running. So I mean, they were getting after it for sure. Let's go to our lightning round questions. You ready? Okay, best leader you ever had?
Gary Spear, my brigade commander, Lieutenant General retired, Colonel Spear at the time. I was a 2-time company commander for him. And I'm glad I had him early enough in my career because he taught me how to be an infantry officer. Really, he was disciplined, just held us accountable, focused us on the basics. And what I learned from him in the early 90s carried with me the rest of my career. My first operational deployment was under him to Haiti for Uphold Democracy.
We already went over your worst leadership mistake. We talked about your regret with and your father. Any other biggest regret other than being a better father?
Yeah, I would say Denali 2021. I thought I was ready. I wasn't ready in the way that I should have been ready. And, the expedition didn't end up the way that I wanted it to. And, even though people have told me, hey, you didn't quit, I felt like I quit. I got frostbite. I get some altitude sickness. But truth of the matter was, I don't think my headspace and timing was ready for it. So when I go back, I'll be 60 here in a couple years, and that's my plan is to go back and run way up to that.
Good for you. I have no aspiration to climb Denali. Although I did have a guide one time, and he told me, hey, I forget what he's going to do. We were going to I can't remember. I thought it was like we were going to make some big approach to make the approach, but yeah, I don't have aspiration to do that. That big type of. I don't like being cold anymore. I don't like the cold. Period in your life you didn't appreciate at the time.
High school.
Really?
Yeah, I mentioned I went to a Catholic high school. I went to high school in Philly. I'm from Philly. I think, when I've reconnected in some ways with my high school, and I realized, man, I wish I would have just been more engaged in that time, I guess. I mean, I played basketball. I was captain of the basketball team and that kind of stuff, but I think I just think that was a period that I think probably I could have focused more on.
Like achieving or just having fun or what? Or everything?
No, I think achieving I mean, I was did great in high school, but I think it was just people identify with St. Joe's Prep as, one of the formative experiences in our life who have gone there. And for me, it wasn't. And I think part of the reason it wasn't was just because I didn't let it be. I don't know why. To me, it was just whatever. I was just going to high school, but little did I realize I went to the same high school as my dad. My brother ended up going there. My dad identifies very much with it. My brother does to this day. For me, it sort of passed over, and I think, man, I must have missed something. It wasn't a bad experience at all. I just wish maybe I was engaged in that space and just forgot it. But that's what I thought of. I mean, I am getting old.
You are. Worst career advice?
Probably, which is probably play it safe, in terms of in terms of jobs and career assignments, you know, uh, do what it is that you're supposed to do. Don't necessarily do what you want to do, which is the corollary of the best career advice, which is, I might have mentioned this already, do what you want to do and do it well. But I had a boss as a lieutenant that, gave me some advice. It's like, hey, listen, these are the things that you need to go do. But I veered off of it the minute I decided to go to West Point. And once I went that route, the advice I was given was don't do it. It's going to ruin your career. But I did it. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it because I want to do it. And I'm going to do it well. And, I did, I think.
What keeps you up at night?
Where'd all this hate come from? It feels like it feels just, there's just a lot of anger in the world today. And well, that anger doesn't keep me up for me personally. It does for my grandchildren. And I wonder what kind of world they're going to grow up in, kind of thing. I mean, my kids are older. They're adults for the most part, but I think about my grandchildren and what's that world going to look like for them in 10, 15 years. So that's kind of what keeps me up at night.
So you're talking about domestic politics, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, I think well, that's sort of the root cause. I think, of it. But there's a lot of anger where it just seems people aren't accepting on both ways, right? Of how other people feel. They're quick. I mean, whole families break up over. It used to be don't talk about politics and religion. I think you're okay with religion. People are gonna be like, yeah, okay, we'll have a discussion about, but politics, you ain't coming to freaking dinner anymore, man, because you're left leaning or right leaning. So yeah, I think that's the thing that keeps me up a little bit at night. I just wonder what that's going to look like extrapolated out 10 years from now.
I want to backtrack in conversation a little bit, and I think this might pertain to your job there with Google and the designation of the drug cartels in Mexico as foreign terrorist organizations. I've been thinking about this a little bit. We actually I had someone write about this months ago with that. I think during the campaign when Trump said he might be doing that and how that might impact. We work with guys on the border and law enforcement guys, them individually, where they could get targeted in their homes if they got doxxed or stuff, because there's. I don't know if you can tell me or not, but I imagine that Google has operations in California and in Mexico and down there. They might be targets if there was something to come up. Can you talk to that? I guess that idea from the U.S. Army side, troops down and deployed. I saw a report last week where we've got drones watching them now, and then also maybe in your current job in terms of security risk to Google.
Yeah, I mean, we have offices. In fact, I've been down there in Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and other places in LATAM. And yeah, I mean, that's absolutely a concern for sure, no doubt. And it's something that we've got to pay attention to in terms of our security plans and that type of thing. And I think, as far as troops along the border, again, it goes back to what we designate as a national security concern. Um, you know, to be honest, I didn't mention this when you said what keeps me up at night, but yeah, that keeps me up at night too. Maybe not so much the cartels, but what drugs like fentanyl and others can do to kids, right? I got a classmate. It was heartbreaking, right? And we all know. I mean, we either know or know someone who knows someone that may have died, a young person from a drug overdose like fentanyl. And I have a classmate from West Point, and just blew me away when he told me how his daughter passed away from a fentanyl overdose in college. And yeah, so add that to the things that keep me up at night. Now I'm not sleeping, but yeah, it's a concern, right? Those are the things for sure.
Well, what are you reading right now?
So I'm reading. I read usually. I read two books at a kind of at a time. One is sort of a fiction book that I read Mark Greaney's book. He's written the Gray Man series. I picked up his last book, but I'm reading Sentinel from his Josh Duffy series, and then I'm reading The Last Step, which is by, I think his name is Rick. I forget his last name, but he was on the first. It's about the first U.S. expedition to K2 in 1978. Unbelievable, man. I mean, those are hard people.
Yeah, yeah, that's one thing that I don't like climbing parade, but climbing, when it's 30 below. Oh my God, three pieces of gear you can't live without.
My Sunto watch, my Solomon shoes, and my Yeti water bottle. I'm not getting paid by any of them. I and my hiking poles, because I break many a hiking poles on hikes because I'm old and I need like a hiking pole to help me get up.
Got it, got it. Okay, final question. Advice to your 18-year-old self. So this is after high school, prior to West Point.
Yeah, I think it would go back to what we hit on earlier. Just I'm in such a rush to get through life, man, to get to the next job, to get to the next assignment, to get out of West Point, to get into command. The thing I would tell my 18-year-old self is like, hey, slow the roll there, brother. Enjoy the moment. Really enjoy it. Appreciate where you're at. Be grateful for where you're at. When I reread your article this morning on the train, it's sort of what I've been thinking about a lot. Some advice I need to take from my soon-to-be 58-year-old self. Because, yeah, when you're on the north side of 50, years are limited, right? So,
Yeah, I remember I had I think I was 48, and we had me and a couple guys, my lab rats, and these guys I was the oldest one. They're in their early 40s, or at least one of them was. And we had a major he just got selected for Delta, and he came and he wanted to train us that day. and I think we did strength, and then the work capacity was like 8 deadlifts at 185 pounds, and then a sled push, like for 20 minutes. The and the other, it was me, this other guy named Cody. His nickname was Cockstrong. He's in his 40s from Wyoming too. And there's this other guy named. He was a teacher, but he was in his 30s, mid 30s, and so was this major. I was so happy when I said, you guys go down to, 4 deadlifts." Because me and Cody will sit to me. And then, I hear my wife's younger than me, and I'm like, God, I wish I was a monster at 45. You know what I mean? I was. I mean, I could hammer now. Now, definitely, you definitely feel the wind in your face.
Yeah,
Coming down.
it's called wisdom.
Brian, thank you so much. Appreciate you. Thank you for your time.
Hey, Rob, thanks very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all you do.
Yes, sir.